I want to minimize because that's what screwed me up.
No, so yes.
Okay, so let me see. Where did I put it? Well, when you ask the question, I didn't hear right there. Oh. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our training on the procurement plan and code of conduct. We should be getting ready to update those and put them into your online application. So let's get started. So hopefully you already know that each SFA has to have their own documented procedures. This is required by USDA that every SFA has documented procedures for their procurement, and it should reflect how you are actually procuring. If you develop your own procurement documents utilizing our sample procurement plan, you typically will have far less problems than if you try to create it from scratch. As we've looked at procurement plans for the SFAs, what we often see is that the procedures are not indicative of what the SFA is actually doing. And so it has to go back to them. So you want to make sure that you don't use any of the sample information in the procurement plan. Make sure that you put in your own information. Let's talk a little bit about the code of conduct, because each SFA must have a signed code of conduct for all people that are engaged in the award and the administration of any of your contracts that are supported with child nutrition funds. And what I've seen on some of these applications that were online applications that we're getting in is I'm seeing just the school food authority director, child nutrition director, submitting the code of conduct specifically for themselves. So you have to have the signed set of code of conduct for anybody who is engaged in the awarding and administration of contracts with the child nutrition funds. So anybody, if you have to approve your contract with your superintendent or with the school board has to review and sign off on your contracts, those people need to sign the code of conduct as well. And what the code of conduct is supposed to be doing is to alert people and let them know that that we can't tolerate conflicts of interest, such as when an SFA awards a contract to someone who has either a financial interest or another interest in the firm that's selected for the award. And this applies to the employee, or officer, or agent, any member of the immediate family, his or her partner, any organization which employs or is about to employ one of the above. Employees, officers, or agents cannot solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors or potential contractors or parties to sub-agreements. And we've often gone in to an SFA for a back to school meeting or other kinds of meetings during the year. And we've seen, excuse me, where the SFAs have solicited items from their vendors to give away during things like raffles and for meetings, and just to make sure that you know that this is not allowable. Penalties for violation of the standards of code of conduct may include or are not limited to reprimand by the Department of Education, dismissal by the Department of Education, or any legal action that's necessary. So like we said, you can use your own organization's code of conduct as long as it addresses all of the requirements that we discussed. But you also can use the one that we provided for you, which is the USDA code of conduct. But again, we talked about before where we often see where they send us only a code of conduct for one person and not for all people that are involved in the procurement process. If you use an RFP, the proposal also has to be evaluated by a committee of employees, and each of those people that are involved in that procurement process must also sign the code of conduct. Let's move on into micro purchases. And I know y'all have heard us talk about micro purchases many times before. I'm going to review just a little bit. That's a method of procurement that you can use to purchase supplies or services where the dollar amount doesn't exceed $10,000. And of course, to the extent practical, the SFA has to distribute micro purchases equitably amongst qualified suppliers. You can award a micro purchase without soliciting competitive quotations if the SFA considers the price to be reasonable. When you have a procurement review, the reviewer is going to look at your micro purchases to ensure that multiple suppliers were used for like items. And if they were not, it would be a finding on the review. You can see this is the sample chart that's in the procurement plan. The micro purchase procedures must include how you plan to equitably distribute the micro purchases amongst qualified suppliers. So let's look at the samples. So as you can see on this chart, this SFA is going to have 3 types of micro purchases, and under evaluation used, they are stating who they are going to alternate purchases with. So you see that for office supplies, they're going to use Walmart, and then they're going to turn around and use Office Depot. For t-shirts, they're going to use the Custom T-shirt shop and Bulk Custom Shirts. And for miscellaneous repair parts, they're going to alternate between Home Depot and Lowe's. You just have to make sure that each invoice does not exceed the $10,000 threshold. Now, if your SFA is in a small rural area where there's only one local store within a reasonable distance, you indicate that in your procurement plan. So, for example, in this procurement plan, this SFA is in a very rural area, and the closest grocery store is, other than Rivertown Market, is 40 miles away. And it's not reasonable to expect the SFA to to utilize more than one grocery store because the next closest grocery store is so far away. So you just indicate that in your procurement plan so that the reviewer will know that upon coming on site for your review. Now let's talk a little bit about small purchase procurement. Hopefully you know the small purchase threshold is $30,000 and below, unless you have a district threshold of less. In this case, on this slide, the district has a threshold of $20,000. So as always, we must use the stricter. So in this case, the stricter is going to be the district threshold of $20,000. Charter schools, remember, small purchase threshold is $250,000 or less. When you're using the small purchase method of procurement, you have to make sure that you have written specifications that you provide to each vendor. Make sure that your descriptions are clear and accurate. Buy American provision is applicable when you're using the small procurement method. And make sure that you obtain price quotes from at least 3 responsible and responsive vendors. And of course, make sure you document all quotes and maintain them on file. So when we award the small purchase procurement, we're going to award to the responsive and responsible bidder that is lowest in price. Responsive means that the vendor submits a bid that conforms to all specifications in terms of the solicitation. Responsible means that the vendor is capable of performing successfully under the terms of the contract. So once you determine that the vendors are both responsive and responsible, then you would award using the lowest price. And make sure you document all procedures. Recently, I've had some food service management company proposals that have come in where they didn't answer all of the questions that were asked in the proposal and have been deemed non-responsive because they didn't provide all the information that was needed. So make sure you monitor those contracts and make sure that they provide you all the information you need. Make sure that you use a minimum of 3 sources. Remember, USDA requires only 2, but the state requires 3. Any vendor that you send a solicitation to has to be eligible, able, and willing to provide the product, goods, and services that you need. So here's the chart of the small purchase procurement in the procurement plan. So as you can see, produce, this is a very small SFA, and so they know that they are not going to exceed the $30,000 in a year. So they're going to use quotes. But remember, it's not, even if you get a quote for a month and it's $10,000, and then the next month it's $10,000. If you exceed $30,000 in a year, then you use the wrong procurement method. So make sure that you consider that when you're completing your procurement plan. So like I said, they're going to get produce quotes, and they're going to seek quotes from 3 different vendors: Louisiana Fresh, Matranas, and Capital City. Now, it doesn't mean that if another vendor comes along, you can't send a quote to them. But that way, you know you have at least you have the 3 quotes. You can also get information online. Supplements are one thing that people will typically get online quotes for. So you can get your quotes, save them, and have that as your backup that you did get quotes. A lot of SFAs will get things like Ensure, Pediasure, and Carnation instant breakfast that they need for special diets. And everybody always says, well, Walmart and Sam's are the cheapest. So if you go online, get your quotes from online for Sam's, Walmart, Costco, whatever, then you can use that as your 3 quotes. During administrative review, the state agency has to determine whether, in their judgment, free and open competition has occurred. So it's very, very important that you maintain all documentation to support your award process. So you also are going to have to plan how you're going to complete formal procurements. And you have to make sure you have that in your procurement plan. There's a number of ways that you can get your formal procurements done. Either you can use an invitation for bid, we call it an IFB, or a competitive proposal, or an RFP. So let's look at the chart for that. Now this SFA is getting all of their food products, cleaning supplies, paper, and plastic from one company. And so they're going to do a formal IFB because the price is the most important thing. For dish machines, they plan to use a formal RFP where because service is involved, and they want to make sure that they evaluate other things besides just price. And then we have bread, and they're going to do a formal bid for that. They're going to do a bottom line pricing, and it's going to be a fixed price. Now, any of these categories could have been broken up. There are some folks that will do a formal procurement for meat, and then do a formal procurement for frozen fruits and vegetables, or frozen and canned. So you can procure it in any categories you want. Just make sure that you tell every single vendor how you plan to award this bid. Here we put in bottom line pricing. But if you put in bottom line pricing and each vendor has to be able to provide all products, it could be a little bit risky. So you may want to consider doing, especially in the times we're in right now with COVID, that there may not be a vendor that carries all of your items. And so if you do a bottom line bid, then you might find nobody's responsive. But if you do an item by item bid, you may find that it's going to take several vendors to be able to provide all the items that you need. Of course, you have to advertise the procurement, and it has to be announced in ways that do not restrict free and open competition. Try to use more than one announcement method to reach the widest possible audience, and use direct mailings to vendors to hopefully ensure that you get some response. Remember that you have to advertise the procurement. You can use regional newspapers, trade periodicals, procurement websites, and direct mailings. I always believe in direct mailings in addition to the regional news source. Remember that your advertisement has to contain the following things. It has to contain a general description of the items to be purchased, the deadline for submitting any questions, and when they're going to receive a response for their questions, the date of the pre-bid meeting, if there is a pre-bid meeting, deadline for submission of proposals, the address where the solicitation can be obtained. Make sure you include the non-discrimination statement. Now, these are all the requirements by USDA. And I've actually cut down a number of advertisements for a number of different SFAs because the cost of advertising is so high. You may want to make sure that you do limit your advertisement to the minimum requirements. Also remember that you have to publish it twice. And I get questioned all the time about, okay, twice, is that for a week? It meant twice means twice, 2 days. It has to be published in a regional newspaper that is in the locality. Now, and I'll use my old town, the Ponchatoula Times is not considered a regional news source. The Advocate would be considered the regional news source. So remember that the first advertisement has to be at least 15 days before the bid opening. And then if you're a public school system, you have to publish it to the electronic bid platform. The solicitation has to clearly define the purchase conditions. It has to describe the contract period, the date, time, and location of the bid opening, and how the vendor will be informed of the bid results. Terms and conditions that each bidder must fulfill to be evaluated. And what are the benefits to the SFA if the contractor does not perform as contracted? And there must be a statement regarding return of purchase incentives, discounts, rebates, and credits back to the child nutrition program. The solicitation also has to include piggybacking if it will be allowed. If applicable, an escalation or de-escalation clause that always is based on an index. It has to include the method of evaluation and the type of contract. Specific bid procedures must be included, and all solicitations must include the access requirement by the SFA, state agency, USDA, and the Comptroller General. If you make the decision to piggyback off of another SFA's contract, there are a number of conditions that have to be met. Both USDA and the state agency, and not the state agency, and the state have piggybacking requirements, and you must follow both. The solicitation has to include limitations such as either the dollar value or the number of additional parties that can be added if piggybacking is going to be allowed. But when an SFA piggybacks onto an existing contract of another SFA that was joined after the original contract was awarded, the SFA has to make sure the original solicitation and contract included all the language for the additional parties and specified applicable limits, either by stating the number of additional parties or the dollar value. If piggybacking is allowed, the SFA has to make sure that a material change has not occurred. So that would be that it couldn't exceed $30,000. There also has to be a provision that the contractor is going to retain all the books and records for 3 years after the final payment. And there also has to be a provision included concerning giving the SFA, the state agency, and USDA auditors full access to their records. Now that's the USDA requirements. Then let's go to the state requirements. Revised statute 38.2211 says that, first of all, the original contract has to be in compliance with that revised statute. And then the time frames for the piggybacking SFA has to be within 1 year of opening the bid. The total purchases on the contract can't exceed 2 times what is to be purchased by the original political subdivision bidding the contract. The piggybacking SFA has to obtain written consent from the SFA it's piggybacking off of. It also has to obtain consent from the vendor for the additional purchases. The product that the piggybacking SFA has to be exactly the same product that the original SFA bidding the contract was bidding for. So you can see that the regulations just don't really make it easy to piggyback off of another contract. A better option is to plan ahead and include both SFAs on the original solicitation, and that's the way you're really covered. So you've got to make sure that you define all the purchase conditions, such as maintenance of records, how you're going to order. You have to complete the signed statement of non-collusion and provide detailed specifications and estimated quantities of the products that you're planning to purchase. This optional provision is, I think, becoming more and more important I've gotten multiple phone calls from different SFAs that have not gotten anybody to bid on their items. So if you do a proposal or an IFB, if you add this language that your bid prices are going to be compared to the state of Louisiana Office of State Purchasing Contract, and if the state price is lower, the state contract would be used. What that does is it gives you a backup. Like I said, there's been many times I've gotten calls this year about SFAs not getting any bids. This provision can also be used where the state of Louisiana has a number of what they call brand contracts. AutoChlor is one of those brand contracts. A lot of people want to use AutoChlor for leasing of machines, for servicing machines, and also for dish machine product. But because the state AutoChlor contract is a brand contract, and the state of Louisiana allows for brand contracts, but USDA does not. So if, let's just say, you bid for chemicals and you put this provision in, if you got nobody else to bid on your proposal, then if you put this language in, you would be able to use the state contract for purchasing the AutoChlor products, because you've actually gone out and bid and you didn't put AutoChlor products, you put the generic product. So you could use this contract if you wanted to. Now, always remember that if you do a formal solicitation, you have to include the affirmative action steps that are outlined in 2 CFR 200.321. These steps are intended to assure that minority businesses, women's businesses, and labor surplus firms are used whenever possible. The affirmative action steps have to also be included in the bid solicitation. And the affirmative action steps have to include placing qualified small and minority businesses and women's businesses on your solicitation list whenever you can, and assuring that these small businesses are solicited whenever they are potential sources. You can also divide your total requirements when it's economically feasible into smaller tasks or quantities to permit maximum participation by small and minority businesses and women's businesses. You can establish delivery schedules where the requirements permit to encourage participation by small and minority businesses, using the services and assistance as appropriate of organizations such as the SBA and the Minority Business Development Agency to obtain lists of possible contractors. You can also require your prime contractor, if there are subcontracts to be let, that they must follow the same affirmative action steps that you must follow. So while the affirmative action statement and the steps have to be included in the solicitation, the SFA must also indicate in their procurement plan how it will be accomplished. Here are 2 links that you can use to research and find qualified small and minority businesses and women's businesses. And that's the SBA list and the Hudson Initiative list. You can actually download the Hudson Initiative list and maintain it on your computer, but the Small Business Association list is major. And I do, when I talk to different SFAs about contracts that they're doing, I do remind them when there's areas that I know of that where we have minority and women's owned businesses, I do remind them to include those in the solicitation. But remember that if you're using an RFP, we talked about there having to be a set of weighted award criteria. And while price is not the only factor, it has to be weighed higher than any other factor. And each prospective vendor must be provided the award criteria that you are going to use and the weight of each criteria. When you make your award, you're going to make it to the most responsive vendor that is the most advantageous to the SFA with price and other factors considered. This is a sample RFP scorecard. A copy is also in the procurement plan. The SFA can use your own scoring criteria and your own weights as long as price is the primary factor. If you're doing a commodity processing bid, you also have to include the value pass-through method and the provision for information in bids and responses for food recall procedures. You must provide contact information for your contact person and backup person for handling food recalls for both the vendor and the SFA. When you use a cost reimbursable contract, you have to include stating that allowable costs will be paid to the vendor minus discounts, rebates, and/or credits. Normally, I don't really particularly care for cost reimbursable contracts because I like to know what I'm paying for. But Some SFAs have been more successful this year in using a cost reimbursable contract because the prices have fluctuated mostly up. The prices have changed so rapidly. But if you're doing a cost reimbursable contract, they can't include any unallowable costs from any billing documents, and they must certify that only allowable costs are submitted. And they have to identify the amount of each discount, rebate, and any other applicable credits. When you're contracting with a food service management company, there's numerous requirements, and that's in a separate training that you can find on the link on this slide. We're not going to go into food service management contracts. The non-competitive proposal method is used only if items are available from one single source, when the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive negotiation. So, like we said, when can it be used? Only if it's available from a single source, or the public emergency does not permit a delay resulting from competitive solicitation. The awarding agency authorizes a non-competitive proposal, or after solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined to be inadequate. Anytime you have a non-competitive proposal, it must be approved by the state agency. You can use a non-competitive negotiation for a one-time purchase of food, such as to get samples to determine if students like a particular item. But you must maintain documentation of the item name, the dollar amount, the vendor used, and the reason for the non-competitive procurement. We've had a lot of non-competitive proposals that we've used lately because we've had an emergency. The emergency purchase always has to be approved by an SFA official, and maintain a log of any emergency purchases. And at a minimum, make sure you maintain the item name, the dollar amount, the vendor, and the reason for the emergency. If your normal vendor can't provide the item, also make sure you add that documentation for the reason for the emergency procurement. When you're utilizing any other organization's contracts, including state contracts, make sure that you refer to memo 18-79, because you must make sure that the original solicitation was properly let and awarded. And you have to maintain the original solicitation documents on file. If you're using a market basket analysis, you need to make sure that the award is done based on an established or representative sample of goods. And the SFA has to select a representative sample of goods. The U.S. Foods contract, USDA found out that they never provided the prices for the other items on the U.S. Foods contract. So the SFAs in Louisiana are limited to using the original representative sample of goods that were put into the market basket. So it limits what they can purchase because the solicitation wasn't done correctly. You also must obtain pricing. We talked about pricing. You must obtain pricing for the other goods. I like to see this in contracts because it gives you a lot more flexibility, and it's a clause where you can acquire additional goods into a contract, and there's some language in your procurement plan that you can put into your proposals to be able to add goods and services to a contract. So this is just some language that you can use. Now, USDA does recommend that the additional goods should not be more than 5 to 10% of the estimated value of the contract. But that you can put in your proposal so that you can use that to provide it just in case you underestimate, or if you want to add something new to the contract. I don't know whether it's feasible right now, but I do like putting contract renewals in for an additional year if if you can, but it must be listed in the original contract. Any additional goods and or quantities also have to be added to the contract upon renewal using a contract amendment. We've had some vendors who have been disqualified from further dealings in child nutrition programs because of poor performance. And USDA nor the state agency wants you to have to deal with a vendor who has demonstrated poor performance during either a current contract or a previous contract. So you can determine that a bidder is a non-responsible bidder and reject their bid as long as you have proper documentation. You need to make sure that you have proper written documentation if you're going to deem a vendor non-responsible, excuse me. So that's it on procurement plan. There is some termination language for termination for cause and disqualifying a bid in your 22-23 procurement plan. There has been a few changes from the 21-22 to the 22-23. So I encourage you to use the latest and greatest because it gives you, as I find things that I think are can help an SFA in making their procurement documents stronger. I try to add those to the procurement plan. So let's see if we have any questions. I was asked to remind everyone that the state update will be in person on September the 28th at Pennington Biomedical Research Center, and that you can register on Louisiana Fit Kids. question is, if you're getting quotes and the same vendor always has the lowest prices, is it okay as long as I have all documents from all vendors? No, it is not okay. I asked that question of USDA because I had an SFA that has a child care center and the students are enrolled in the school. And Walmart always had the lowest price on baby food. And so I asked USDA that since Walmart always has the lowest price, is it necessary to get prices each and every time? And I was told yes. So that was USDA's answer, not mine.
I have a additional question with that. Like I know when I was buying equipment, and one of the vendors, I had waited almost a year for some supplies that I put, even though there was the lowest vendor.
Tracy, can you speak just a little bit louder, babe?
I'm sorry. I said that I had two vendors for one of the vendors, they won the quote, but it took forever for this equipment to come in. So the other vendor had the stuff. And when I required with the vendor that had the lowest bid, they didn't know when they was gonna get the stuff in. So, I had to, I had them to send me documentation about that their stuff was delayed. And I had to go with the vendor with the stuff because my stuff was breaking down and it wasn't worth letting a repair person to come in. So in cases like that, I mean, so how do you handle that situation?
If well, we've got a situation like that right now.
All right.
I believe it was the period of time was 30 weeks or 36 weeks. You can put in your document, you can put in your solicitation that it must be delivered by, and do that originally from the outset of writing the solicitation. Because if this is something that you need within a specific, let's just say this is in June and you need it for the opening of school, then you can put must be able to deliver within 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it is that you need. Now, right now, you may not be able to get anybody to deliver in that short a period of time, but you can, and of course, you take the risk of not getting any responses. Does that answer your question, Tracy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do we have any other questions? No? Okay, we also have another training tomorrow on HACCP. And you may want to I'm just reminding you that we did create a HACCP plan prototype that you can use. So you may want to pull that up during a training. Sarah Traha will be doing that training tomorrow. So please tune in. And then we have another one on Thursday. What's the topic of the other one? I don't remember. Okay, well, y'all have a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of the week. I know it's great, a great start to the school week.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me where that sample for the plan and that is in the resources? Or where is it
It
located?
should be under forms
Uh-huh,
and then under HACCP.
okay. All right,
If you don't find it, shoot me an email and I'll send it to you.
yes, ma'am, thank you.
Okay. Well, everyone have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of the week. And we will see you next time.